Cannabis, the plant they were terrified of. Is it a real possibility, or just a figment of humanity's imagination? A mere urban legend? Is this rumor ultimately a good thing or a bad thing? Tonight, once again, we'll examine whether it's true or not from a Japanese perspective. Episode: Cannabis, the plant they were terrified of. What if one of the most persecuted substances in human history was never actually dangerous? What if the war waged against it, the arrests, the propaganda, the decades of criminalization, had nothing to do with public health? And what if the real reason it was banned is far more disturbing than anything its critics ever claimed it could do to you? This is the story of cannabis, and almost everything you were taught about it was constructed by people with something to hide. Part 1. Introduction. There is a plant that has been growing alongside human civilization for at least 10,000 years. It has been used as food, as fiber, as medicine, as a spiritual tool, and as an industrial material across virtually every culture on Earth that had access to it. Ancient Chinese medical texts describe it. Egyptian pharaohs were buried with it. The founding fathers of the United States grew it on their farms. Queen Victoria's personal physician prescribed it to her for menstrual pain. For the overwhelming majority of human history, this plant was not controversial. It was not dangerous. It was not a symbol of moral decay or criminal behavior. And then, in the space of roughly a decade in the 1930s, it was transformed through a deliberate, documented, and extraordinarily effective campaign into the most dangerous drug in America. The transformation was not scientific. It was not based on medical evidence. It was based on something much simpler and much older. Money, race, power, and the specific fears of specific men who had very specific reasons to want this plant gone. Part 2. Background. Cannabis sativa has been cultivated by human beings since approximately 8,000 BCE. The oldest known woven textile is made from hemp fiber, discovered in what is now the Czech Republic and dated to 26,900 BCE. In ancient China, the pharmacological text Xinnong Benqiao Jing, compiled around 100 CE, but based on traditions dating back thousands of years, described cannabis as a treatment for over 100 medical conditions, including pain, inflammation, and what we would today call anxiety disorders. In India, the Vedic tradition incorporated cannabis, called bhang, into religious practice for millennia. The god Shiva is associated with it. Its use in ritual context is documented across thousands of years of continuous tradition. In ancient Egypt, cannabis pollen has been found in the tomb of Ramesses II, and residue consistent with THC has been detected in Egyptian mummies dating back to 950 BCE. In medieval Europe, hemp was one of the most economically significant crops on the continent, used for rope, sailcloth, clothing, and paper. Without hemp rope and hemp sails, the age of European maritime exploration does not happen in the form it did. The pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock came on a ship whose sails and rigging were made from hemp. The paper on which the Declaration of Independence was drafted, hemp. The canvas of the covered wagons that crossed the American frontier, the word canvas derives from the Latin cannabis. This plant built the world we live in. And then, in the 1930s, America decided it was the enemy. Part 3. The complete story. The setup, what was at stake? To understand why cannabis was criminalized, you have to understand the industrial landscape of the 1930s. Hemp, the non-psychoactive variety of cannabis, was on the verge of a commercial revolution. New mechanical harvesting technology, specifically the decorticator machine patented in the 1930s, was about to make hemp fiber processing economically competitive with cotton and wood pulp paper at industrial scale. Popular Mechanics magazine ran a February 1938 cover story titled New Billion-Dollar Crop, describing hemp as the next major American agricultural industry. The article had been written before the legislation that would destroy the industry had passed, and it was published just as that legislation was taking effect. Several major industrial interests stood to lose significantly from a hemp boom. William Randolph Hearst owned millions of acres of timber forest and had made enormous investments in wood pulp paper production. A competitive hemp paper industry would have devalued those investments substantially. The DuPont family had recently patented nylon, a synthetic fiber, and petrochemical-based synthetic materials that would compete directly with hemp-derived products. Hemp's resurgence would have threatened the market position of their new patents. And Andrew Mellon, Treasury Secretary of the United States and one of the wealthiest men in the country, had significant investments in the petrochemical industry that hemp threatened to disrupt. He was also the uncle of Harry Anslinger. Harry Anslinger, remember that name? The man who banned it. Harry J. Anslinger was appointed commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in 1930. He was ambitious, politically connected, and looking for a mandate. For the first years of his tenure, Anslinger was on record as dismissing cannabis as a minor concern. In early statements, he described it as relatively harmless and not a significant law enforcement priority. And then, in 1934, his position reversed completely. What changed? The end of Prohibition. The 1933 repeal of alcohol prohibition eliminated the primary justification for a large federal narcotics enforcement bureau. Anslinger needed a new enemy to justify his budget, his staff, and his institutional existence. He found one. And the campaign he launched is one of the most effective and most cynically constructed propaganda operations in American history. Anslinger called cannabis marijuana, using the Mexican Spanish term deliberately to associate the plant with Mexican immigrants and reinforce its foreignness to white American audiences. He and Hearst newspapers ran stories describing cannabis use as causing madness, violence, and murder, stories that were not supported by any scientific or medical evidence, and that were frequently fabricated entirely. Stories of black jazz musicians using cannabis to seduce white women. Stories of Mexican farm workers committing violent crimes under its influence. Stories of young white Americans driven to depravity by a single exposure. The racism was not incidental to the campaign. It was the mechanism. His testimony lasted approximately 90 seconds. When a representative asked whether the American Medical Association supported the legislation, Anslinger said yes. The AMA did not support it. The AMA's representative, Dr. William Woodward, appeared at the same hearing and testified that the AMA opposed the bill, that cannabis had legitimate medical applications, and that the evidence for the harms being claimed did not exist. Congress passed the act anyway. Cannabis was effectively banned in the United States. The AMA's objection is in the congressional record. It has been there since 1937. It did not matter. The Controlled Substances Act and the Nixon Confession. In 1970, the Nixon administration passed the Controlled Substances Act, placing cannabis in Schedule 1, the most restrictive category, reserved for substances with no accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. Heroin is also Schedule 1. Cocaine is Schedule 2. Meaning it has recognized medical applications. Cannabis, according to the federal government, is more restricted than cocaine. In 1994, Nixon's domestic policy chief John Ehrlichman gave an interview to journalist Dan Baum that was published in Harper's Magazine in 2016. In that interview, Ehrlichman said the following, and these are his words: "The Nixon White House had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. They knew they couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or to be black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and black people with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, they could disrupt those communities, arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news." Ehrlichman continued, "Did they know they were lying about the drugs? Yes. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not speculation. This is the Nixon administration's domestic policy chief, in a recorded interview, describing the criminalization of cannabis as a deliberate tool of political suppression targeting black Americans and anti-war activists. The war on drugs was, from its most politically significant moment of escalation, a racially and politically targeted enforcement operation. The drug was the pretext. The communities were the target. The science that was ignored. In 1972, the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse, created by Nixon himself and chaired by Raymond Schaefer, a Republican former governor of Pennsylvania, released its final report. The report recommended the decriminalization of cannabis for personal use. It found no evidence that cannabis caused the harms that justified its Schedule 1 classification. It found evidence of significant harms caused by criminalization itself. Nixon rejected the report entirely. He had privately told Schaefer before the report was released that he wanted cannabis kept illegal regardless of the findings. The report existed. The science existed. The recommendation existed. It did not matter. The endocannabinoid system, the discovery they buried. In 1988, researcher Alan Howlett at St. Louis University discovered cannabinoid receptors in the human brain. In 1992, Israeli scientist Raphael Mechoulam, who had first isolated THC in 1964, identified the first endogenous cannabinoid, anandamide, named after the Sanskrit word for bliss. What this established is that the human brain has a system, the endocannabinoid system, specifically designed to interact with cannabinoid compounds. The human body produces its own versions of these compounds. The receptors for them are distributed throughout the brain and nervous system, regulating functions including pain, mood, appetite, memory, immune response, and inflammation. The human body was not accidentally compatible with cannabis. It was built with a system that cannabis interacts with, a system that cannabis has been interacting with across 10,000 years of human use. The endocannabinoid system is now recognized as one of the most significant regulatory systems in the human body. It was discovered in 1988 and identified in detail by 1992. Cannabis remained Schedule 1, no accepted medical use, throughout this period and beyond. A regulatory system in the human body whose primary known activator is a plant. These are real findings. They are important. They should inform policy. But they do not support Schedule 1 classification. They do not support the claim that cannabis has no accepted medical use. The evidence for medical efficacy in treating chronic pain, nausea from chemotherapy, certain forms of epilepsy, anxiety, and multiple other conditions is now sufficiently robust that the FDA has approved cannabinoid-based pharmaceuticals. The science, if followed, produces a policy that looks like controlled regulated access, the same framework applied to alcohol and tobacco, both of which carry significant health risks that are managed through regulation rather than prohibition. The science does not produce a drug war. Someone made a choice not to follow the science. That choice has been made consistently at the federal level for nearly 90 years. The historical theory. The historical case is the clearest of all the theories because it is the most documented. Criminalization was driven by industrial competition, racial politics, and institutional self-interest. The 1937 testimony is in the record. The Ehrlichman confession is in the record. The Schaefer Commission report is in the record. Nixon's rejection of it is in the record. The history of cannabis criminalization in America is not a mystery. It is documented. The documents are public. The argument they make is uncomfortable but straightforward. The plant was banned not because of what it does, but because of who used it and what industries it threatened. The psychological theory. The psychological literature on cannabis prohibition focuses on the power of moral panic, the process by which a behavior or substance becomes, through sustained media and government messaging, associated in the public mind with danger, deviance, and moral failure in ways that persist long after the original messaging has been discredited. The reefer madness propaganda of the 1930s was transparently false, and it worked anyway. Once the association between cannabis and danger was established in the cultural imagination, it proved remarkably durable. The propaganda created a framework that subsequent evidence struggled to dislodge because the framework was emotional rather than rational. People do not typically change strongly held beliefs in response to evidence alone, particularly when those beliefs are tied to identity, community, and moral orientation. The psychology of prohibition's persistence is, in many ways, the psychology of how any moral panic sustains itself beyond its evidentiary basis. The conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory about cannabis is, unusually for a conspiracy theory, almost entirely supported by documented evidence. The claim, cannabis was criminalized through a coordinated effort by industrial interests, timber, petrochemical, synthetic fiber, in collaboration with a politically motivated federal bureaucrat who needed an enemy, using racially targeted propaganda to overcome public and medical opposition, and the prohibition has been sustained by the pharmaceutical, alcohol, and private prison industries whose economic interests are threatened by legalization. Every element of that claim has supporting documentation. The pharmaceutical industry spent significant money lobbying against cannabis legalization in states where legalization was on the ballot. The alcohol industry has funded anti-legalization campaigns. The private prison industry, whose business model depends on incarceration rates, has a documented financial interest in drug enforcement policy. This is not speculation. These are lobbying disclosures and campaign finance records. The conspiracy theory about cannabis is the one conspiracy theory in this series that is the most straightforwardly supported by the available evidence. The documentation exists. The financial interests are disclosed. The DEA has approved Marinol, synthetic THC, for the treatment of chemotherapy-induced nausea. The federal government simultaneously maintains that cannabis has no accepted medical use and approves pharmaceuticals derived from or chemically identical to cannabis compounds for medical use. These two positions cannot both be true. They are maintained simultaneously by the same government, in the same regulatory framework. The contradiction is not accidental. It is profitable. Second, the incarceration disparity. Cannabis use rates among white Americans and black Americans are approximately equal. Studies consistently show comparable usage rates across racial demographics. Arrest rates for cannabis possession are not comparable. Black Americans are arrested for cannabis possession at approximately 3 to 4 times the rate of white Americans nationally, and in some jurisdictions the disparity is significantly higher. The law is neutral. Its enforcement is not. And this pattern, documented across decades of data, in state after state, city after city, is not an anomaly. It is a feature. It is the Ehrlichman design still operating 50 years after it was publicly confessed. Third, the medical research obstruction. Cannabis remains Schedule I, which means federally funded research on its medical applications requires a DEA license and must use cannabis supplied by a single federally licensed source, the University of Mississippi's NEDA-approved cultivation program. Researchers have documented extensively that this supply is of significantly lower quality and different chemical composition than commercially available cannabis, which introduces confounding variables into any research using it. In other words, the regulatory framework that would theoretically allow research to establish cannabis's medical utility is structured in a way that makes high-quality research significantly more difficult. Whether this is deliberate or an artifact of bureaucratic inertia, the effect is the same. The evidence that would end the Schedule I classification is harder to produce than it should be, because the Schedule I classification controls the conditions under which that evidence can be gathered. The system is self-sealing. Part 6. Modern Implications. In 2025, cannabis is legal for recreational use in 24 American states and for medical use in most of the rest. The legal cannabis industry generates tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. Cannabis dispensaries outnumber McDonald's locations in several states. And cannabis remains federally illegal. Schedule I. The most restrictive classification in American drug law. The people who built the legal cannabis industry operate businesses that are, by federal law, criminal enterprises. They cannot use standard banking services without significant legal risk. They cannot deduct normal business expenses from federal taxes. They cannot access federal business loans. The federal illegality creates a parallel economic system operating inside the borders of a country where the activity is state legal, treating it for federal purposes as equivalent to heroin distribution. Meanwhile, the incarceration of individuals for cannabis offenses continues in states where it remains illegal, and the communities bearing the weight of that enforcement are, as they have been since Anslinger, disproportionately black and brown. The legal cannabis industry is largely white-owned. The people who built it are largely doing so without criminal records. The people who were arrested and incarcerated for doing the same thing in the same communities before legalization are largely still carrying those records that limit employment, housing, and voting rights. The plant was legalized. The people it was used against were not unpunished. That asymmetry is not an accident. It is a choice. And it is a choice that has been made quietly and consistently in state after state as legalization has moved forward without automatic expungement of prior convictions. Part 7. The final question. There is a plant that human beings have used for 10,000 years, that the human body has a dedicated receptor system for, that multiple medical bodies have concluded has legitimate therapeutic applications. That was banned through a documented process of racial propaganda, industrial lobbying, and deliberate scientific suppression. That a White House official admitted was targeted not because of what it does, but because of the communities it was associated with. That plant is still federally classified as having no medical use. People are still in prison because of it. Communities are still being disproportionately policed because of who uses it. And the industries that work to ban it, the pharmaceutical companies, the alcohol producers, the synthetic material manufacturers, are still operating in a world shaped by that ban. The story of cannabis is not a story about a drug. It is a story about power, about who gets to decide what is dangerous, who pays the price when they do, and how thoroughly a lie can be maintained when the right people are invested in its continuation. So here is what I want to leave you with. We now have more evidence about what cannabis is and what it isn't than we have ever had. We have the history, we have the science, we have the confession, and the federal law has not changed. What does it tell you about a system when the evidence changes and the policy doesn't? And what does it tell you about who that system was built to protect and who it was built to contain? Let me know in the comments.